Hello and welcome to day 121 of 365 Days Towards Racial Change. My name is Tomlins Nyback. We're here talking about black issues, mostly my personal perception. I have to admit, but I think it's a valid angle. More of the in-depth, more of the inside. You're not what we maybe see on mainstream media or television, big black events and things like that. I'm coming from a different angle and perspective, maybe more outside the mainstream, um, with my perspective and thought on black life in America. As I continue this project, two thoughts emerge from what I see. Are black people perpetuating the black thought? The black thought from the days specifically of slavery? Are we, as a group, perpetuating um, adherence to carrying dysfunction, adherence to staying ignorant of how this land works, or we just continue to blindly go from dysfunction to dysfunction without any real process of thought, and encouragement to think, to challenge our own beliefs first. You know, the second side, kind of the same coin as far as mindset and thought. Well, does where's the white mind at? I see privilege, entitlement, expectation of favor, all up and down, all over white society. And I've come to understand now that I've been more attuned and sensitive to my environment that, these are things they teach their children, they pass along to their children. They talk about these things often, things that I'm now running into my 50s here on the 50 years here on the planet, and I'm just now starting to have those important financial conversations with my white friends, with my white support. You know, these are issues that they've talked about 30, almost 40 years ago. The ways that the white interaction, oh, is just so much. It's what's I don't know. It's what I saw when I grew up on the Waltons and watching television. You know, but it's sad though because even uh, black families portrayed, especially back in the '70s, were at least you saw black people conversing. Even in sitcoms and comedies, they were addressing issues. You don't see that today in with black folks. you know, and it's we just keep going for what's popular instead of working on education, forcing education, making it an imperative. So white folks, the they got theirs, and they just are continue to grow, move on, and prosper. And I think it's because of that cognitive cohesion in the white families, more so than black families. I'm not saying that kind of intimacy, that necessary intimacy, does not exist with black folks. I'm sure it does. I'm just saying I've not been exposed to it. Now, my second burden, the second thought, is for financial literacy, getting black folks to understand financial terms, what's going on in the world with banking, paying attention where their dollars are spent, how to resist or come against that, understanding the futility of some financial schemes, understanding inflation, understanding how the American financial system is rigged against the blue collar worker, why the blue-collar worker needs to educate him or herself to understand, you really got to do stuff with your financial life so you get the maximum bang for your buck out of to sustain you in later life. Another thing not taught to me in the home. I feel sad 'cause, like, it wasn't taught to me, but I damn sure would be teaching it to my children had I had any. That's still on my bucket list and all that. I think God wanted me to do a 180-degree turn, live some of that for a while, and see. I actually know some guys in their 50s and 60s that started families late, what we say late in America. That's another conversation. But I'm talking necessary things here, financial literacy. A literacy in any discipline gives us access and enables us to have better success in excelling in the respective discipline. Right? I want to be rich and wealthy. Therefore, I need to acquire some knowledge. I want to understand motor vehicles, how to work on cars. Therefore, there's some language and some training goes along with that. I want to understand politics or be a president. Okay, well, there's a political literacy that goes on. Kind of see what I'm getting at there. I'm inspired by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. I want you to get these books I'm going to show you. He speaks more eloquently on these issues, and we're getting back to some other stuff today, but we're going to get heavily back into his work as well. Thank you for hanging in there with me through the signers of the Declaration of Independence. I thought that was a very important series, at least for me, just to understand a little bit more. We spend a lifetime understanding the origins of the United States. We can have a long conversation about that, but we want to try to stay on point with racism, slavery, marginalization, and disenfranchisement of black folks here. Dr. Claude Anderson talks about these issues much better than I can. You can find him on YouTube all over the place. He still goes around the country speaking. Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. Black Labor, White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice, and Dr. Anderson's National Plan to Empower Black America, Powernomics. You can find Dr. Anderson at powernomics.com and the Heritage Institute in Washington, D.C. Behind me, see #us2. You'll find some black women supporting each other there. Go to Blog Enough, BLAGGENUF, for it's kind of a black Facebook. If you found me here on YouTube, then you are technologically literate. Therefore, you can find your flavor and your community here on the World Wide Web. Today we're getting back, going to check in on Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe's another book. If I hold up a book, I want you to get it, except for that Adam Smith Wealth of Nations. Don't get that. That's another whole nother subject. That was a different illustration a few days ago. Uncle Tom's Cabin, we were on this big thing with the signers of the Declaration of Independence. If you stayed awake and stayed interested, then here's a little reward. We're going to have story time today. I love story time. I'm actually almost finished this book, and not only do I want you to get the book and read it, but read the whole book. This is one book you gotta read the whole book. Don't lay it down. Put a bookmark in it and let it collect dust. Stay with it. Read beyond what we go through here. This is checking in. We're illustrating this. I found this book to be great illustrations of the slave life, of the slaves, circumstance in America. It's not just about one black man named Old Tom, but there's uh, a lot of people on the periphery, white and black, in this book. So please and read it to the end. Some interesting things happen at the end of the book. We're in chapter 9, Uncle Tom's Cabin, day 121 here. Now, we left off, Black Sam has just got back from trying to help the slave trader to get back Eliza and Harry. He's actually after Harry. There's some language in there where he doesn't really care about Eliza too much. He wants that young boy. The young boy represents quite an investment. He's already paid the money for him. So a young, essentially black slave. Now, Eliza, her husband, her family, they're mulatto quadroons. This is those octoroons. These are actually a lighter skin black folk because there's some white blood mixed in there, and so they're of a shade. They actually can pass for Hispanics and almost white. That's how fair they are. So, but anyway, Harry represents quite an investment. You can get him, train him, condition him, keep him physically fit. You're talking quite a return, ROI, return on investment, financial literacy. Get it. So Black Sam tells about Eliza jumping across the ice of the Ohio River and stuff like that. And from chapter 9, we open up introduction to a man named Senator John Byrd. And he's back from meeting in the Senates and the politicals and the meetings and stuff, right? Representing his people and stuff like that. And he tells the activity of the Senate to his wife. And I think this is the mid 1800s, so there's some quiet time after the Revolutionary War. We just went through that series, the signers of the Declaration of Independence. The war was kind of heating up when the Declaration was signed. Lasted a few years after that. By the mid 1800s, the war had quieted down. Now we're actually gearing up, and tensions are rising over another big issue, slavery, but it's more an economical issue. And we're going to be charging into the Civil War. In that respite is where the activity of Uncle Tom's Cabin is happening. The chapter really is extensive about Mrs. Byrd, white woman. And white women, we can't escape. I say different things about different people at different times. I try to be fair. We all got limitations and dysfunctions and all that. Everybody shares a little bit of that. So I don't make blanket statements about any particular group, just maybe individual certain pockets within groups. So you may have heard me say things about white women, how I'm looked at on the street and stuff like that. Those things are very true. But it's also true that white women represent a very strong branch of advocacy, especially during the abolition movement. And so this white woman, Mrs. Byrd, is an advocate. So you can think of the abolitionist women, wives of the politicians. They had, in a sense, they had some sway there in the home. And like, I've never been married, but I've had girlfriends, right? And if the female can be burdensome with nagging on my ear on some issue. This is Mrs. Byrd on this issue of slavery and abolition and treatment. One of the main issues is helping escaped slaves. They are apparently in Ohio, which borders Kentucky, which is a slave state. Right? So I'm getting she harangues the senator consistently, lovingly in the home. And in the midst of their conversation about aiding escaping slaves, their conversation is interrupted, and Mrs. Byrd is escorted back to the kitchen. And there, guess who's there? After having this conversation about helping slaves, the senator he's assured his contemporaries that he does not help slaves, and there should be laws, and we don't want to invoke any anger from the Kentuckians and stuff like that. There is Eliza and Harry in the kitchen, worn out, cold, torn clothes, wet, and Mrs. Byrd just goes into beast mode for helping Eliza and Harry. Nice little irony there. I like Miss Stowe's work, her writing there. She crafts, very great writer. So Miss Byrd goes in at her best. She gets fussy, starts fussing over Eliza and all that. Maternal care is invoked. Eliza's like, she's already in a safe space because Mrs. Byrd goes into beast mode to help Eliza and Harry, but Eliza doesn't really know it yet. But Eliza says, do you care for your children? Have you ever lost a child or stuff? You'll read it in chapter 9. And that just breaks Mrs. Byrd's heart because she's recently lost a child. Mortality rates for children and birthing mothers very high back then. Prenatal care and stuff like that. Very challenging. The technology isn't what we have today. So it was just common, the men, even back then, for I'm sure centuries, did their best to populate. We could say, oh, sex and stuff like that, but there was a very real concern for propagating the species. So women back then had an extreme value as child bearers. So she has lost a child recently. And Eliza goes on to tell the dead that Mr. Shelby owes, and we talked about this a few times. This will continually come up where these slave masters, they'll go into town and they'll get drunk and make stupid bets and go into debt, and now they got to sell off some slaves and stuff like that. That's how the story opens up about Uncle Tom. Shelby's gone into debt. His gambling debts had overtaken him. Therefore, he ain't going to become his own indentured servant or nothing. Like, he's got a whole crop of slaves out there that he can just throw at the problem. That's how they did it. That was the economics back then. Senator is they decide to help, and they decide to take her that night. Rainy, bumpy roads and stuff. It wasn't like, go to get out on the interstate and drive on a smooth road. They're in the woods and potholes, ruts, and darkness, and all this mud. The senator falls in the mud as the carriage gets stuck at some point. It's that type of, he's a good guy, the Senator John Byrd. And I could tell he dares not go against the will of his wife either. Yeah, he has a genuinely sympathetic heart for the plight of the slaves that reside south of his state, no doubt. A lot of mud and trouble. And at the end of the chapter, we're introduced to John Van Trump. I hope I'm saying that right. He's an advocate, and he's willing to sacrifice his sons. Remember some of the slave uprising. You know, we do have. Uh, it's, it's is it John Brown and his sons? You know, we've got these white abolitionists and advocates uh, willing to go to arm the conflict. They bring their family members along and lose family members along the way in this issue of emancipating, freeing, supporting slaves, supporting human beings. As I was putting this summary together at Chapter 9, escaped slaves, emancipated slaves, and like they were they were always slaves. They are a class of different kind of human slaves, and in the language, something I'm probably struggle with that I need to think on. These are human beings. There's one of my favorite movies is Platoon, um, Charlie Sheen, and there's a scene they're raping one of the Vietnamese little girls, and it's not graphic, but it's definitely implied. And Charlie Sheen, he's tearing away. He tells, "Don't do it, don't do it," and his fellow soldiers are like, "What do you mean? And she's a dink, she's an object to be used as, And his argument, he's like, "She's a human being," he says, and and they spit on him and ridicule him and all that. But that's the same thing. We see the language consistently weighted towards that's a slave, former slave, emancipated slave. As the slave is the indicator of that black individual, and that may be an error. That may be one of the internal problems of uh, the black problem in America, is that our our language reinforces an institution uh, that keeps us marginalized and disenfranchised. You know, because see, in grade school, I felt some kind of way that suddenly there was when the slave issue was introduced early in grade school, in the history classes and whatnot. I had mixed feelings about that. I didn't come home and decompress on that or get debriefed on that. Suddenly there was a very clear line between me and my white counterparts in the same classroom. You know, my white counterparts, oh, the history showed nice flowery language and history about uh, religious freedoms and escaping political oppression and freedoms and a lot of tokens and symbols and stuff like that. But the slave issue was like, why my ancestors had some very real rights, privileges, property taken from them, controlled. They were beaten, So, it's a stigma. So, I go walking out in white society, not only am I black, but in the mind, I'm guessing, of others is slave. I see it when I look at myself and when I see other black folks. Um, the churning in my mind includes that five-letter word, slave, in there. There's, it's this disgusting uh, virus now in my mind. It's an institution in society. So the slave question, the slave, anything slave is less than. It's a subordination. It's a it attaches itself and dirties the object on which it lays. You know what I mean? So, if you get what I'm saying uh, about that, I don't think some in some ways we change the narrative, right? Black people have changed nigger into nigga, and we've tried to redefine some of the pejorative terms towards black folks, but slave, I don't think you can get away from that. But it's very much implied when I leave these doors. It's still very much alive. You know, um, I feel as though the white folks in the classroom are like, "Phew, boy, glad we didn't get roll those dice or get dealt that hand." you know, um, and further, black folks kind of reinforce whatever stereotypes may come out of that. Uh, so here, chapter 9, it's and in the comments I have an annotated version of Uncle Tom's Cabin, and it says this is the most political chapter of Harriet Beecher Stowe's work in there. So you get the politics. This is Northern politics about trying not to agitate its Southern neighbor. The chapter ends with the senator leaving some resources with John Van Trump, and he says, this is for them. And John and the senator are very good friends, the two Johns, and it's much like the Good Samaritan, from the Bible. There's a lot of evangelical language in Stowe's work as well, not surprising. So those are some good little tidbits, good little chapter there to get the mind, and we finally see that Eliza and Harry are getting along with this escape of anyone. We know that the longer a person is away, the better their chances of long-term success. Almost like addiction too. That's my experience. The longer I stay away from those substances and alcohol, better my chances of not going back. So there's chapter 9 out of the way. We'll probably pick up the pace a little bit. I got to do some math to see where we are. This is day 121, so we're coming up officially to a third of the way, and I got to kind of speed things up. I'm going back to school. I'm owning it. I'm taking Spanish. I'm gonna learn Spanish in the next 2 semesters. Get that out the way. So we'll see how that goes. I'm Tomlin's Nyback. Thanks for hanging out with me, us again at 365 Days Towards Racial Change. I'll see you tomorrow for day 122. See you later.